Welcome everyone to another discussion or lecture video for the course Introduction to Government and Politics taken by external students at the University of Papua New Guinea. In this lecture discussion, we are going to discuss political ideology in Unit 5. Now, let's jump into our discussion. In this lecture discussion, we will try to capture the objectives that is stated in the study guide on page 32. The three objectives are we will try to define and outline the main functions of ideology. We will be discussing the main features of the liberal ideology, which is important for us as Papua New Guinea in a democratic or under a democratic environment, and outline the key elements of other influential ideologies that is important to us Papua New Guineans, and the discussion on politics in the course Introduction to Government and Politics. Without further ado, let's continue on. So, what is ideology? In your lecture slide here, you have ideology is a political belief system shaping a group's worldview, legitimizing political system and justifying social order. Now, there are three main functions here of ideology. The first function, now remember that we define political ideology or ideology, it encompasses a set of political beliefs and values that shape how individuals and groups perceive or see the world, how they interpret the social relations, and how they understand political system. So ideology acts as a lens through which us, the people, view society and also guide us in our actions and influence our attitudes towards governance, social order, and individual rights. Now, when it comes to the main function here, and basically the first function is to understand the existing order, to understand how a society is. Now, for Papua New Guinea, we are in a democratic society. Ideology helps us understand the kind of society that we embrace since 1975. So, in that sense, ideology provides framework for us understanding and interpreting the current system and the current society or the status quo that we are in today. Now, ideology helps us understand the distribution of political power, wealth, and resources within our society, who holds political power, who are the influential actors, so on and so forth. So, the first function is trying to understand the social order. Second is a model for a good society. Ideology offers vision of an ideal society. For example, in our case, we adopted democracy because we see this democratic ideology of liberalism, and we'll talk about that later, as an ideal form of government that we want to embrace, accept, and acknowledge. So in that sense, ideology helps is a function that model a good society. So it offers vision of an ideal society. It outlines values, norms, principles that promote good social, economical, and political values, and also the interactions. The last function is support for status quo or change. What does that mean? Ideology as a function can either reinforce or justify existing structures or advocate for transformative change to address perceived injustice and inequalities. Ideologies can help change the society that we live in. For example, if we don't want a democracy in Papua New Guinea, then we would call for our government and the people coming together to ask for a new system of government. In that way, ideology, we will try to use an ideology to make sense and argue that this system is not working for us. So let's change the system. So that's another function of what ideology is, and that is to support for status quo or change the status quo. Now let's look at the Marxist view of ideology. Now, Marxist view, in a Marxist perspective, Marxists emphasize the role of ideology in perpetuating or continuing to support and legitimize the dominance of a ruling class in a capitalist society. So Marxists believe that capitalist ideology creates false consciousness in the working class. So the false consciousness in the working class is interpreted in this illustration of the picture here. We see the working class here hard at work, but working for who? For what? So Marxists argue that capitalist ideology creates a false consciousness in the working class. The hidden motivation or the hidden connection with the working, this capitalist ideology is the economic interest of these elites here. In our picture here, elites are these people here looking down at the working class. So according to this, Marxists said that capitalist ideology sort of create false consciousness amongst the working class and obscuring their true interest and reinforcing the status quo. And the status quo is for the economic or the interest of the dominant class. Now, in addition to that, Marxists argue that ideologies are seen as reflecting and promoting economic interest, of the dominant class, and this sort of that partial views of social and political reality should be broken down in order for the working class and also other classes as well to have a fair share of the distribution of wealth in a society. So for further reading, you can turn to page 35 and read the Marxist section here. Talks about Marxism, and look at the superstructure that Marxist talks about on page 35 of your study book. Let's move on. Now let's talk about liberalism. So what is liberalism? So liberalism basically is this idea of personal freedom and individualism. So that idea is captured in democracy or representative democracy that Papua New Guinea embraced in 1975. So that idea of personal freedom and individualism. Now let's look at the main features. What are the main features of liberalism? Number one is individual freedom and rights. What that means is that liberalism prioritizes the protections of individual liberties, such as freedom of speech, assembly, and religion. So liberalism protects this right. Secondly is the importance of humans as individuals. Now this emphasizes the intrinsic value and dignity of each person, advocating for equal treatment and opportunity in a society. Now the third concept, or the third feature, is limited government. So liberalism, the liberals believe that state should not have more power over the society. So liberals believe in constraining the power of the state to protect individual rights and promote market-based solution. Now, what does it mean to say promote market-based solution? The state should not have the right for trade and exchange, or big government should not have the right for transaction or trade of goods and services, or let's say big companies or various companies should be freely doing their business in a market environment, and not state coming in to try and control the market environment. Okay, let's move on. Human reason is important. Liberalism places faith in the rational discourse and critical thinking as the basics for political decision making. So what that means is that human beings as individuals should be allowed to freely make decisions based on who they support, what political party they support, or whatever political issue that they are advocating for. So human reason should take paramount in any liberalized society. Now let's look at equality of opportunity. Basically, equality of opportunity means that it seeks to create a level playing field where individuals can compete, and based on merit rather than arbitrary factors. That's different from equality of outcome, which we will be talking about when we discuss socialism. But individuals should have an equality to compete based on their merit. And lastly, tolerance. Tolerance is in reference to the idea that liberalists believe to promote diverse beliefs, lifestyle, identities within a society. So in a society there can be 3-4 different religious groups. So the tolerance and the acknowledgement, acceptance of their existence is very much captured in this idea of tolerance as one of the main features of liberalism. Now, example would be freedom of speech laws in liberal democracy. This idea to protect speech is very much important. Now let's move on. Let's look at conservatism. Now, what is conservatism? Conservatism is the desire to preserve the existing society. Now, the desire to protect traditions, the desire to protect the norms that has been existed or in existence over time. So conservatives believe in the desire to preserve this existing order or society. Now the main features of conservatism are basically the emphasis on region, tradition rather. Conservatism values the wisdom of the past, customs, institutions, and practices, viewing them as essential for social stability and continuity. Now the next feature is pragmatism. Now conservatism prioritizes practical experience and gradual change over abstract theories or radical transformation. This idea is in relation to number one here, emphasis on tradition. So tradition has always been existing over time, and it's pragmatic. It has been practiced. There is evidence. So that is why conservatives promote, or the feature is pragmatism, believe on the practicality of experience and not some abstract theories or radical transformation. Now, say for example, the LGBT gay and rights movements in various countries in Western democracy. That is an idea that conservatives do not advocate for. Why? Because that is an abstract theory and it accounts for a radical transformation of a society. You're trying to redefine the biology for that matter. So that is this feature of conservatism that is talking about priorities of practical experiences. Now, conservatism believe that human beings are morally corrupt. Okay, moral corruption of human beings. They believe in the flawed nature of humanity and the importance of a moral order to restrain selfishness impulses. So they believe that human beings are morally corrupt and they cannot exist on their own, and there needs to be a device, rules, laws, regulation to regulate human behavior, and that is where tradition comes in. So they are skeptical about less government intervention in society. For example, the next feature is importance of organic whole of society. What does that mean? Conservatism emphasizes the interconnectedness of individuals with traditional social units like family, community, and nation. Just like Papua New Guinea, where we value our family, conservatism emphasizes these ideas of interconnectedness and individuals within traditional social units. And lastly, hierarchy, authority, property, and ownership. What does that words mean? Conservatives support hierarchical social structures, respect for authority, and private property rights as foundation of social order and stability. Example would be preservation of cultural heritage sites. Is an example here, and the picture here depicts this. You would see that in this, conservatives, they sort of emphasize on the preservation of tradition. Okay, let's move on. Again, here more detail and supporting explanations can be found on page 38 of your study guide. Now let's look at what socialism is. Socialism is the idea of that advocate for community, equality, and common ownership. The main features of socialism are community and fraternity. What does that mean? So socialism emphasizes collective solidarity and cooperation over individual competition and self-interest. So this idea of community, fraternity, is very much important in this idea of socialism. And the next feature is equality of outcome. What does that mean? So this is basically, or rather, equality of outcome is different from equality of opportunity. So this feature here, it seeks to reduce social economic disparities by redistributing wealth and resources to ensure everyone's basic needs are met. An example would be, because there is no women parliamentary in Papua New Guinea Parliament, so the argument for 22 reserved seats follows this line of equality of outcome. There should be an equal distribution, or there should be even this redistribution of resources to ensure everyone's basic needs are met. The third one is material benefits based on need. So socialists advocate for social welfare programs and public services to address poverty, healthcare, education, and housing. So the example would be the free education policy by the government. That is an example of material benefits based on need. There is a need that every child, human being, needs to get basic access to, or get basic access to education. That is an example of that feature here of socialism. Okay, there is a feature of socialist policy. Next is reduction of class distinction. So socialism aims to abolish or mitigate class divisions by empowering workers and challenging capitalist ownership and control. So this is very much likened to the Marxist ideology that we should abolish and mitigate all class divisions within our society. There should not be a working class, the elites and the peasants. There should be same level of class. There should be one communal community, people working together. And this idea has been promoted by China, Russia, under the Marxist revolution, and some socialist countries as well. Now lastly is common ownership. So this idea here, it promotes public or collective ownership of key industries, resources, and means of production to democratize economic decision making and promote social justice. This is the idea that the government, an example would be China, the state. The government owns the piece of land for the interest of the people. Okay, so an example here, the Nordic welfare states with extensive social safety nets. So that idea of common ownership, that no one should be ahead, no one should be left behind, we should all have common ownership, okay, of the material and the distribution of wealth. Again here, for more information, please consult the book on page 39. I'm trying to give us the main features or the main themes that will help us understand the study guide. So please consult the study guide. Now let's look at the other ideology, fascism. Fascism generally has its roots in the 19th century, and it is fused together a sort of entertains this ideas that is against Western political thought. So values such as rationalism, progress, freedom, and equality, okay, were thus overturned in the name of struggle, leadership, and power, heroism. Okay, so this idea here, the organically unified national community. So let's look at the main features of this idea of fascism. Main feature number one is organically unified national community. So fascism emphasized the collective identity and unity of a nation, often glorifying the past greatness and promoting a sense of national destiny. Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler and Italy under Benito Mussolini exemplify this idea of fascism here. Emphasis on collective unity and the unity of the nation. Now the next feature is rejection of rationalism, progress, freedom, equality. Now fascists reject liberal and socialist values, instead embracing authoritarian leadership, power politics, and glorification of violence and militarism. Okay, and the next is emphasis on leadership, power, heroism, and war. So fascism believe and they exalt charismatic leaders, prioritize national strength and expansion, and promote aggressive foreign policy. Example is the Nazi Germany propaganda on promoting national unity and militarism that led to a mobilization of the nation and eventually led to World War II. So basically this idea of fostering unity, power, and heroism. Now let's look at feminism. Now what is feminism? Feminism is a belief in the dominance or domination of women by men. The main features of feminism are belief in the domination of women by men, and there are different strands here. So basically, feminism critiques this patriarchal power structure, that power structure that men has been the dominant species, and sort of advocates for gender equality. Men and women should be equal, and there are different strands. For example, the liberal feminism, they focus on the legal and political equality for women within existing systems. So such example as the equal rights to vote, equal share of parliament, that comes under liberal feminism. Where you have socialist feminism, this highlights the intersectionality of gender and class oppression, advocating for economic and social justice for all women. So we should destroy the dominant class, which is composed of mostly of men. So that's the idea here. Now, radical feminism, on the other hand, it challenged these patriarchal institutions and norms at the core, seeking to dismantle this idea of hierarchy and the dominance of male, and the system of oppression, and envisioning an alternative models of society, meaning that women can do whatever they want, and not align with that patriarchal sort of idea here. So example would be the Me Too movement, this in Western countries today, which mobilize women worldwide to speak against sexual harassment and assault and demand systemic change in the workplace. Now, the last ideology that we will be talking about is environmentalism. So environmentalism, can be found on page 41 of your book. This is the concern for human degradation of the environment. That's basically the idea that we should protect our environment. The main features are concern for human degradation of the environment. So environmentalism addresses the ecological crisis caused by human activities, including pollution, climate change, deforestation, and habitat destruction. And secondly, advocacy for sustainable practices. So again here, environmentalists, or the idea of environmentalism, promote conservation, renewable energy, waste reduction, and ecological stewardship to protect natural ecosystem and ensure the well-being of future generations. So an example would be global climate change protests, like the extension rebellion, this sort of to protect the extension species or protect the environment, so on and so forth. The another example would be the global youth led by climate strikers inspired by the Swedish activists such as Greta Thunberg, which mobilized millions of people to demand urgent action on climate change from governments and corporations. Now let's look at the case study before we close up. So this case study, that's called Japanese modernization. Now, how does this sort of come into being? So integration of ideologies here. So liberalism emphasizes on individual freedom. So in Japan's post-war democracy, so the idea of liberalism sort of influenced Japan's post-war democracy, emphasizing on individuals' freedoms and rights. Notably, before Japan were under a Meiji era where it is traditional authoritarian rule. So after that, Japan had embraced this idea of liberalism, freedom. However, on the other hand, Japanese has always preserve its culture. So the preservation of traditional cultural practices and values in Japan society has been something of value to the Japanese society. But at the same time, Japan also, the country is also a welfare system. So there is a development of welfare policies and public services to promote social equality and well-being in Japan. For example, is the Japanese healthcare system, okay, which combines elements of public provision with private insurance to ensure universal access to medical care while preserving the choice and competition. So in Japan, they sort of integrate liberalism on freedoms of individual freedom, protections of individual freedoms. At the same time, they also preserve their traditional cultural practices, and they try to ensure there is welfare equality distributed through amongst the society. Now, in conclusion, ideologies play a pivotal role in shaping political beliefs, societal norms, and governance systems, reflecting diverse values, interests, and values of the good society. Now, implication is that understanding ideology is essential for analyzing political dynamics, social movements, and policy debates as they inform political decision making and shape public discourse. Now, call for action. We should encourage critical reflection and engagement with different ideological perspectives to foster informed citizenship and promote constructive dialogue on pressing societal needs. Now, that concludes our lecture for today on political ideology, Unit 5. And again, here in this lecture video, I've discussed the major components or the themes here. For more detail of the concept here discussed, look at page 32 to page 44 of your study guide to give more in-depth and in detail on the discussion that we have here. With that, thank you and see you next time.